My husband, who once humiliated me in front of an entire industry for his mistress, now stood in a courtroom shackled, begging me to save him. I gave him fairness, nothing more. Because the moment he chose the blade, he carved away any path back to freedom, to dignity, to me. The night before the annual party, Nathan Cross stood in the doorway of our kitchen, coffee cup in hand, looking at me with that polished calm he wore in the boardroom and at home. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled halfway, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the rich aroma of roasted beans. "You've worked hard this year, Elena," he said, his tone almost indulgent. "I've got a surprise for you tomorrow." I paused, the knife in my hand stilling mid-slice over the salad I was preparing. "A surprise." The corner of his mouth lifted. "I think you'll like it." That was all he gave me, no hint, no detail. Typical Nathan. He enjoyed planting seeds and watching people's curiosity sprout overnight. I didn't press him. I told myself that if he was being this cryptic, it must be something worth keeping under wraps. For the rest of the evening, I found my thoughts drifting toward possibilities. Perhaps it was the partnership title we'd discussed in passing last year. Maybe a new high-profile client he wanted to assign solely to me. Nathan wasn't one for flowers or jewelry. His idea of a gift was a career move. And in our world, that was worth far more than any string of pearls. The next evening, the ballroom at the Grand Regent Hotel was lit like a winter fairy tale. Golden chandeliers spilled warm light across polished marble floors. Soft music from the live quartet wove between conversations and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. The annual party wasn't just another corporate gathering, it was the firm's grand stage. Clients, partners, senior associates, and their guests all came dressed to impress. Deals were whispered in corners over aged scotch, and alliances were quietly negotiated between bites of hors d'oeuvres. I arrived in a midnight blue gown, floor-length, silk that skimmed my body in a way that was professional yet undeniably elegant. My hair was set in loose waves, my makeup sharp enough to hold under the unforgiving chandelier light. If there was going to be a public acknowledgement of my year's work, I intended to look the part. Nathan, of course, commanded the room from the moment he stepped in. Tall, immaculate in his black tuxedo, hair perfectly in place. He had the kind of presence that made people turn without realizing they were doing it. I watched him greet the senior partners, shake hands with clients, exchange practiced laughs. It was the same confidence that had first drawn me to him when we met years ago, the same calculated charm I had once believed was reserved just for me. After dinner was served, the lights dimmed slightly and Nathan took the stage. He didn't need a microphone to command attention, but one was handed to him anyway. "Good evening, everyone," he began, smiling in that warm, authoritative way he'd perfected. "Tonight is about celebration, about honoring the incredible achievements of our team this year. Every victory in the courtroom, every satisfied client, every deal we've closed, none of it would have been possible without each of you." Polite applause rippled across the room. He continued, highlighting different departments and projects. When he turned toward the litigation team, my team, I straightened in my chair. This year, our litigation department has set an unparalleled record, closing case after case in our client's favor. The applause was louder this time. I allowed myself a small smile. "And now," Nathan said, his tone shifting into the kind of practiced pause that signaled a big announcement, "I want to recognize the individual whose dedication and vision have truly stood out. This year's special recognition bonus goes to..." I felt my pulse quicken. My name was forming in my head before his voice spoke the actual words. "Sophie Lane, our exceptional marketing manager." The room erupted into applause. Sophie stood, cheeks flushed with a mix of surprise and pride, or at least a good performance of it. Her champagne blonde hair gleamed under the lights, her crimson dress a shade too bold for a professional gathering, but perfectly calculated for the effect she wanted. Nathan didn't just call her name, he revealed the number. 5 times the standard performance bonus. A few gasps slipped from the audience. Even for a firm our size, that kind of figure was staggering. I clapped along with everyone else, my hands mechanical, my smile fixed. Inside, my mind was running cold calculations. Sophie had been with us for only 6 months. Her position had been created out of nowhere, and she'd been parachuted into a leadership role over people with triple her experience. Yes, marketing had gained traction this year, but to suggest it outweighed the cases I'd closed? Cases that brought in millions? Nathan placed an arm lightly on her shoulder as she accepted the award envelope. That small touch, the casual intimacy, made my stomach tighten. When the applause died, Nathan glanced briefly toward me. "And to the rest of our talented team members," he said, "including our litigation department, keep up the good work next year." That was it. No mention of specific wins. No acknowledgement of the hours I'd poured into cases that other firms had deemed unwinnable. Just a pat on the head in front of the entire company. It was a dismissal dressed up as encouragement. Later, after the speeches and obligatory mingling, I found Nathan by the champagne table, speaking to one of the partners. When the man excused himself, I stepped forward. "So," I said, my voice light but edged, "this was the surprise?" He didn't flinch. "You're an incredible litigator, Elena. But without Sophie's campaigns, you wouldn't have had the same client inflow this year. I believe in giving credit where it's due." I arched a brow. "Are you seriously suggesting that my trial wins are thanks to her promotional emails?" He smirked, the expression almost pitying. "Not emails. Strategy. And besides," he lowered his voice, leaning slightly closer, "we're husband and wife. What's mine is yours. Why fuss over a little bonus? A little bonus. 5 times the usual. Enough to put down on a luxury apartment. Enough to send an unspoken message to everyone in the firm about who mattered more." I heard movement behind us. Someone passing, probably catching fragments of the conversation, and realized with a sudden clarity that people were watching. A scene here would be exactly what some of them were hoping for. I smiled instead, raising my glass just enough to clink it softly against his. "You're right," I said smoothly, though my words tasted like steel. "It's not worth fussing over." The rest of the evening blurred into a haze of polite laughter and hollow congratulations. I moved from group to group, my face composed, my voice steady, but my mind was locked onto one singular truth. Whatever my surprise had been, it wasn't meant for me. Not really. It was meant to humiliate me in front of the people whose respect I had earned over years of grueling work. When the night finally ended and we left the hotel, I didn't speak during the ride home. Nathan hummed along softly to some tune on the radio, completely at ease. But I sat in silence, my nails pressing into my palm, the seed of a decision-taking root. This wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about Sophie. It was about the fact that Nathan had looked me in the eye, promised me a surprise, and then used it to cut me down. He might think I'd swallowed the insult. He might think I'd let it pass. But I already knew I was going to act. The ride home from the Grand Regent was suffocating in its silence. Nathan kept one hand on the wheel, the other lazily resting on the armrest, his profile lit in fleeting flashes by the passing streetlights. To anyone else, we might have looked like a couple simply tired after a long night. But I could feel the space between us. Not just physical but miles of unspoken words hanging like smoke in the air. When we pulled into the driveway, I was out of the car before the engine stopped humming. The chill of the night wrapped around me as I unlocked the front door, stepping into the muted glow of our foyer lights. I slipped off my heels, their click against the hardwood replaced by the muffled sound of Nathan's shoes as he entered behind me. "You didn't say much after the announcement," Nathan remarked casually, hanging his coat on the rack. His tone was light, almost conversational, but there was a faint undercurrent, like he was testing the waters. Kept my voice even. "Not much to say." "That's not like you," he pressed. "Usually you have opinions." "I do." I turned toward him, meeting his gaze briefly before walking past him toward the kitchen. "Just not ones worth sharing tonight." We ended up in the kitchen, me reaching for a glass of water, him leaning against the counter like a man in no hurry to sleep. "Come on, Elena. You're sulking over a bonus." His brows lifted, disbelief laced with condescension. "That's petty even for you." The words slid under my skin like fine wire. I placed the glass down slowly, deliberately. "Petty," I repeated, tasting the word. "Yes." He gave a half shrug as if stating a simple fact. "We've been married for years. What's mine is yours. You really want to pick a fight over a figure in Sophie's payslip." It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the way he said her name. Smooth. Familiar. "You're right," I said coolly, "we've been married for years. Which is why I'd expect you to at least acknowledge my contributions publicly." He rolled his eyes like I'd just recited a shopping list of grievances. "I acknowledged you plenty of times this year." Not everything has to be about you. The rest of the conversation devolved into fragments. Me pointing out the imbalance, him circling back to accuse me of overreacting. It was his specialty. Sidestep the point, turn the lens back on me, make me the unreasonable one. Eventually words ran out. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, charged, the kind that settles into the corners of a room and refuses to leave. I busied myself at the counter, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. Nathan drained the last of his water, set the glass down, and without another word disappeared down the hall. I stayed behind for a moment, letting the quiet press in, my jaw tight. When I finally made my way toward the bedroom, the door was slightly ajar. Nathan was inside, standing near the wardrobe, his back to me. He was half dressed down, shirt untucked, tie gone, his movements brisk and deliberate. I was about to step in when I noticed something odd. He bent slightly, opening the top drawer of his nightstand, and pulled out a small folded item. I couldn't see it first, but when he shifted, the fabric caught the light. Black stockings. Sophie. Sheer. The kind that clung to skin like liquid shadow. They weren't mine. I had never owned a pair like that. I preferred matte finish, thicker denier, the kind you could actually wear under a skirt in court without feeling like a showpiece. These were different. My throat tightened. He held them carefully, almost absently, before tucking them into the pocket of his suit trousers. Then, as if aware of the stillness in the room, he glanced toward the door. I stepped back a fraction, my body pressed against the wall just outside his line of sight. My heart pounded in my ears, but I kept my breathing steady. When his gaze didn't land on me, he went back to his task, grabbing his phone, slipping into a fresh shirt, moving with the efficiency of someone with a destination in mind. I retreated to the hallway, the image of those stockings burned into my mind. Every neuron in my brain started firing at once, pulling up the last 6 months like files from a cabinet. Nathan's business trips that didn't require me. The unexplained late returns. The sharpness in his voice when I asked about his schedule. The way his hand would linger just a moment too long on Sophie's shoulder during team events. And the absence of intimacy between us. The polite goodnight kisses replaced with distracted, sleep well murmurs. The quiet mornings where we moved around each other like strangers in the same house. It all clicked into place with the finality of a judge's gavel. I could have walked in right then, thrown the stockings on the bed, demanded an explanation he'd have to choke on. I could have called him out for every lie, every smile he'd given her in front of me. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I realized a direct confrontation would give him the chance to spin, deny, charm, or attack. Whatever angle he found most advantageous. Nathan was a master at turning a situation until it bent in his favor. No, this needed to be played differently. I moved back into the living room, sitting down on the sofa and forcing my face into something neutral. A few minutes later, Nathan emerged, jacket in hand, face composed but just a shade too tight around the eyes. "Elena," he said, pausing in the doorway, "did you call me?" I looked up, my expression perfectly puzzled. "No." "Why?" He studied me for a moment, searching for something. When he didn't find it, his shoulders loosened. "Never mind. I need to head back to the office for a bit. We'll talk about the bonus later." "Of course," I murmured. He nodded once and left, his footsteps fading toward the door. The moment it clicked shut, I leaned back into the sofa, my eyes fixed on the darkened television screen. I wasn't going to argue tonight. I wasn't going to plead or accuse. I was going to wait, watch, and make sure that when I acted, it would be in a way Nathan could never undo. Nathan emerged from the bedroom that evening freshly dressed, his dark gray suit pressed, hair smoothed into place. If I didn't know better, I might have thought he was heading to meet a client. But I'd seen those stockings slip into his pocket, the subtle urgency in his movements, the faint tension around his eyes. He glanced at me as he picked up his briefcase. "Something's come up at the firm. I need to go in." I was sitting on the living room sofa, a book open in my lap, unread for the last 20 minutes. "At this hour?" "Urgent matter," he said, already pulling his phone from his pocket as though to avoid further discussion. "Don't wait up." And with that he was gone. The front door clicked shut, the sound oddly final. I didn't move right away. Instead, I listened to the quiet. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the low tick of the wall clock, my own steady breathing. I could let him go. I could sit here, stewing, imagining what he was doing and with whom. But no, that would leave me with only suspicion, and suspicion was slippery. Nathan could always twist suspicion into paranoia. Evidence, on the other hand, was solid. And I was a lawyer. I knew the value of proof. I grabbed my coat and my handbag, the one with my spare set of keys to his car, and stepped outside. The cold night air bit at my cheeks as I descended the steps. I waited by the corner of our block until I saw Nathan's black sedan roll past the end of the street. Only when his taillights began to shrink did I step forward, raising a hand for a taxi. The driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly face, rolled down the window. "Where to?" "Just follow that black sedan," I said, sliding into the back seat. "Don't get too close. I'll direct you." His brows lifted slightly. Maybe he thought it was some jealous wife scenario. Which technically it was. But he didn't comment, just nodded and eased the car into motion. Of course. We drove through familiar streets, the city lights flickering against the windows. I knew the route to the law firm well. I could drive it blindfolded. So when Nathan's car sailed past the turnoff without so much as a signal, my pulse quickened. "Keep your distance," I murmured to the driver. Nathan wove through the city with the ease of someone who'd taken this path before. Past the business district. Past the courthouse. Past the neighborhoods where our clients lived. When he finally slowed, it wasn't in front of the firm. It was in front of the Kingswell, a 5-star hotel known for its private suites, discreet staff, and sky-high prices. The kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. Nathan pulled into the hotel's private drive, disappearing under the awning. I told the driver to stop half a block away. "Wait here. I might be a while." From my vantage point, I saw him step out of the car, hand his keys to the valet, and walk inside without looking back. His movements were purposeful, not the rushed gait of someone with a business emergency, but the steady pace of a man arriving exactly where he wanted to be. I stayed in the taxi for a few minutes, my fingers tightening around the handle of my bag. I could storm in there, make a scene, watch Sophie's smug face crumble in real time. But that would be noise, and noise faded. I needed something permanent. When I was certain Nathan was upstairs, the hotel's elevators were slow. I'd stayed there once for a client event. I stepped out of the taxi and approached his car. The valet was gone, probably moving other vehicles, and the driveway was momentarily clear. I pulled the spare key from my bag, the metal cool against my fingers, and unlocked the driver's door. Sliding into the seat, I immediately reached for the dashcam mounted just above the rearview mirror. Nathan had installed it 2 years ago after a minor fender bender. "For security," he'd said. I powered the screen and scrolled back to the last recording. The small speaker crackled to life. The image was slightly grainy in the low light, but the audio was sharp. Nathan's voice filled the car. "Baby, are you there?" My grip on the steering wheel tightened. A woman's voice came through, warm and lightly amused. "I'm here. You're late." "I'm almost there," Nathan replied. Then, as if to explain his mood, "It's that Elena again. I don't know what's gotten into her these past few months. Always looking for a fight." The woman, Sophie, I knew it without needing confirmation, made a soft sound of sympathy. Nathan's voice lowered, almost conspiratorial. "She doesn't even realize who's responsible for her so-called success. Now she's daring to argue with me over a year-end bonus. Outrageous." "I can make you forget all about her tonight," Sophie teased. "I'm counting on it," he said, and then after a pause that made my stomach turn, "I need a kiss from my baby." It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the easy intimacy, the complete lack of hesitation. This wasn't some one-off mistake. This was an ongoing arrangement, one they both spoke about as though it were the most natural thing in the world. I let the recording run for another minute, catching Nathan humming along to the radio after hanging up, as if nothing about the call required any secrecy. I scrolled further back in the dashcam's memory, sampling bits of older drives. Over the past months, there were several similar calls. Some short, some longer. Always the same warmth in his voice, always the same "baby." Memories began lining up in my mind like damning exhibits. Sophie's miraculous leap from newcomer to marketing manager in just 6 months. Nathan's frequent insistence on giving her the best resources, often pulling them from other departments, mine included. The way she always seemed to be at his side during firm events while I was seated elsewhere. I remembered one particular client dinner, where Sophie had been placed directly to Nathan's right, laughing softly at something he said, her hand brushing his arm as if by accident. I'd raised an eyebrow at him afterward, but he'd brushed it off with, She's my junior from university. Just being friendly. Friendly. Even the looks from colleagues made sense now. The way conversations would dip when I walked into a room, the awkward glances when Sophie lingered too long in Nathan's office. People knew. Or at least suspected. And no one had said a word to me. That realization stung almost as much as hearing the call. Not because I expected them to choose sides, but because it meant my humiliation had likely been playing out in whispers for months. I closed the dashcam file and slipped out of the driver's seat, locking the car behind me. The valet was still busy, the driveway still clear. I walked back to the waiting taxi, my steps slow and deliberate. Sliding into the back seat, I told the driver, "We can go now." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Back home?" "Yes," I said, my voice calm. "Back home." But it wasn't the kind of calm that came from peace. It was the calm before a case goes to trial. The cold, clear stillness of knowing exactly what you'll do next and exactly how much it will cost the other side. Nathan thought he'd kept control of the narrative. That I'd never have the proof to corner him. Now I had it. And when I decided to move, it would be final. The morning after my silent drive home from the hotel felt heavier than any trial morning I'd ever faced. I woke before my alarm, my head throbbing from a night of fractured sleep. My mind kept replaying the dashcam audio. Nathan's voice, Sophie's voice, the casual intimacy between them. It wasn't just betrayal. It was betrayal laced with mockery, with that smug certainty that I couldn't do anything about it. I took my time dressing for work. A black suit, crisp white blouse, hair pulled into a sleek twist. The kind of attire that communicated control, even if inside I was piecing myself together thread by thread. When I walked into the firm, I ignored the morning chatter, the smells of fresh coffee, the half-smiles from colleagues. If they knew anything, they wouldn't hear it from me, not yet. Nathan stood at the head of the conference table when I entered the boardroom. The executive team was already seated. I took my usual spot near the center, placing my files neatly before me. The meeting began with the usual updates. Revenue numbers, case progress, upcoming client negotiations. My mind drifted in and out, catching fragments. I was focused on keeping my breathing steady, my expression neutral. Then Nathan's gaze cut to me. "Elena," he said suddenly, "you're late." The room went still. I glanced at the clock. By 2 minutes. His mouth tightened. 2 minutes late is still late. You know the rules. Punctuality is part of our professional image. His voice carried that polished authority he used on associates who'd messed up a filing. "Given that, your perfect attendance bonus for this month is revoked." I kept my hands flat on the table, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Around us, I could feel the shift in the room. Some colleagues glanced away embarrassed for me, others met my eyes with quick flashes of sympathy. Sophie sat near the end of the table, her expression carefully blank, though the faint curve at the corner of her mouth betrayed her satisfaction. Nathan continued the meeting as though nothing had happened, sliding effortlessly into the next agenda point. For him this was routine. For me it was a public stripping of dignity, a calculated move meant to remind me of my place. Or rather, the place he thought I should occupy. After the meeting, I gathered my files and headed for my office, but Nathan's voice called out behind me. "Elena." "My office." "Now." I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. He was already leaning against his desk, arms folded, his tone cold. "Don't bring your domestic attitude into my workplace," he said. "Just because you're my wife doesn't mean you get to give me attitude in front of my team. I've always kept work and personal life strictly separate." The hypocrisy of it almost made me laugh. Strictly separate? I'd heard his syrupy baby to Sophie less than 12 hours ago. But I didn't give him the satisfaction of an argument. Instead, I studied him for a moment, then said, "We're done here." I turned and walked out before he could reply. I went straight to HR. The director, Marianne, looked up from her computer as I entered. "Morning, Elena. What can I do for you?" "I'm submitting my resignation." Her brows shot up. Your resignation?" "Yes." I slid the letter across her desk. "Effective immediately. Process it today." She read the top of the page, then looked back at me, clearly unsettled. "You're a senior partner, Elena. This isn't a decision we can process without consulting Nathan." "Ooh, well, everyone knows you're married. This could." "I'm not here to discuss it," I said evenly. "I'm here to instruct you to process it." Her eyes flicked to the door as though half expecting Nathan to stride in. Elena, this is a major decision. I'm aware. My tone didn't rise, but it sharpened. Just follow the official procedures. No consultation necessary. Marianne hesitated, then nodded slowly. Come back this afternoon to collect the final paperwork. I didn't make it back to my office before Nathan summoned me again. When I stepped inside, Sophie was there, perched in one of the visitor chairs like she belonged. Perfect timing, she said, smiling as though we were old friends. Did you see the news last night about the mother who killed to avenge her child? The case landed at our firm. Nathan wants you to take it. It could make you famous. I glanced at Nathan. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. It's a high-profile case, Elena. Handle it well and the publicity alone will be worth it. Consider this a fresh start between us. I'd already reviewed that case online earlier in the morning. Public opinion was a wildfire against the defendant. Taking it would be a career risk. No matter how well I defended, the moral outrage was too strong. Any lawyer on the case would get dragged through the mud. I can't take it, I said. I have multiple ongoing cases and this would stretch resources too thin. Find someone else. Nathan's brows rose, the mockery curling back into his voice. Have you started looking down on difficult cases now? When opportunities come, you seize them, or you're left behind. Sophie leaned forward slightly, her voice all false persuasion. Elena, it would benefit the firm. Think about the bigger picture. About Nathan, the long-term future here. I looked at her, letting the silence stretch. Then I turned back to Nathan. No. Nathan's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression shifted. First surprise, then irritation. After hanging up, he stared at me. Marianne just told me you're resigning. Over a few words this morning. Not just resigning, I said quietly, stepping closer to his desk. Divorcing you. For the first time in years, I saw his composure crack. Divorcing me? Over a bonus in a case? That's childish, Elena. Sophie's eyes lit up at the word, divorce. A flicker of triumph passing across her face before she quickly masked it with a fake look of concern. Elena, let's calm down. I'll give you my year-end bonus if it'll help. Nathan actually nodded at that. See? She's willing to make peace. You, on the other hand, are. I cut him off. Enough. I'm not interested in your bonuses or your peace. My resignation stands. So does the divorce. His mouth twisted, his voice hard. You're making a mistake. Perhaps, I said, but it'll be my mistake, not yours. I left his office without waiting for a response. My heels clicked against the hallway tile, the sound sharp, final. In my office, I packed my things into a box. Files, framed certificates, the small potted plant by the window. I could feel eyes on me as I worked. Whispers traveled faster than paper in this building. Some of my colleagues' expressions were openly curious. Others averted their gaze. One or two had the decency to look uneasy. By the time I walked out with my box in my arms, Nathan was standing in the doorway of his office, arms crossed, jaw tight. I didn't look at him. Not once. The Civil Affairs Bureau was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel sharper. Even the shuffle of paper from the clerk's desk seemed too loud. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was eager but because I wanted to be the one waiting, not the one who had to walk in second. Nathan arrived 3 minutes later. He was dressed to impress. Navy suit, crisp white shirt, tie knotted in perfect symmetry. From a distance he looked every bit the confident, successful managing partner he liked the world to see. But as he came closer, I noticed the small betrayals of his body. Faint shadows under his eyes, a tightness in his jaw, the way his gaze flicked briefly toward me before settling somewhere over my shoulder. Elena, he said simply. Nathan. We didn't bother with small talk. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said, or shouted, in his office 2 days ago. Inside, the process was absurdly simple. 2 signatures, a verification of identity, and the stamping of official documents. For a marriage that had lasted years, built on endless hours of shared work and intertwined finances, it felt anticlimactic. The clerk was polite, efficient, and blessedly uninterested in our story. You can collect your divorce certificate this afternoon, she said, sliding the paperwork into a folder. That concludes the process. I thanked her, stood and stepped back from the counter. Nathan lingered a moment, signing the last page with a flourish before joining me by the door. That was it. Years of my life reduced to a file folder and a stamp. As we stepped outside into the weak winter sunlight, I saw her immediately. Sophie Lane standing by the curb, her blonde hair curling neatly over her shoulders, a white sheath dress hugging her figure. The color choice was deliberate, bridal, symbolic, smug. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't the polite smile of professional courtesy. It was sharp, meant to slice. "Elena," she said sweetly, "if you let Nathan slip away, you'll regret it." I didn't stop walking. I didn't even glance at Nathan to see his reaction. Instead, I kept my gaze forward, my heels clicking on the pavement in a steady rhythm. I wasn't here to exchange barbs with a woman whose entire career and self-worth seemed to hinge on a man's attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Nathan's expression. Something complicated flickered there, but I didn't slow down to analyze it. I'd made it to the edge of the parking lot when a voice called, "Ms. Moore?" "Elena Moore." I turned, scanning the crowd until my eyes landed on a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit. His hair was silver at the temples, his bearing confident in the way only someone who'd been winning for decades could manage. "Victor Hayes," he said, extending his hand as he closed the distance between us. "Hayes and Clark Law Group." I knew the name. Everyone in our industry did. His firm wasn't just bigger than Cross Legal. It was a powerhouse, a place where top lawyers went when they wanted to break records and set precedents. "Victor," I said, taking his hand. "Of course. We've met at conferences." "Yes, briefly," he said with a smile. "But I've been following your work for years. Exceptional litigation skills, remarkable win rate." It was strange to hear praise on the same morning I'd formally ended both my marriage and my partnership. "I heard you resigned from Cross Legal," Victor continued. "Quite the shock in our circles. I couldn't resist the chance to speak to you directly. Are you free for lunch?" I hesitated, glancing back toward the bureau. Nathan and Sophie were still talking near the steps, Sophie gesturing animatedly about something. I turned back to Victor. "I'm free." We walked to the restaurant next door, a quiet place with private booths and a discreet wait staff, the kind of setting where deals were made over grilled salmon and vintage wine. After ordering, Victor leaned forward slightly. "I'll be blunt, Elena. Nathan Cross didn't know what he had. Letting you walk away is a mistake that will cost him far more than he realizes. And frankly, I'd like to benefit from that mistake." I raised a brow. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a partnership," he corrected. "Lead our litigation department. Full resources at your disposal. The clients you bring in are yours to manage as you see fit. Competitive compensation, naturally, though I imagine that's not your main motivator right now." He wasn't wrong. Money was never the core issue. Respect was. Recognition was. And the freedom to work without being undermined by someone who claimed to love me. "Why me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Victor smiled. "Because your track record speaks for itself. Because you're the kind of lawyer clients trust to go to war for them. And because I've seen how you handle pressure. Quietly, strategically, without theatrics. That's rare." I leaned back in my seat, fingers curling around my glass of water. "Nathan started Cross Legal for me, you know. When we were first together, he recognized my talent and built the firm around it. I've always been grateful for that. But over the years, I've repaid that debt. In billable hours, in cases won and clients retained. If anything, we were even. Until Sophie." Victor's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Then there's no reason for guilt. You've carried your share, perhaps more. Now it's time to build something for yourself." The waiter set down our plates, the scent of rosemary and lemon filling the air. I picked up my fork, my decision already made. "I accept," I said. "When do you want me to start?" "As soon as you're ready," Victor replied. "I'll have the paperwork sent over by tomorrow morning." We clinked glasses. Water for me, wine for him, sealing the agreement in a way that felt far more satisfying than the morning's dry stamp of divorce. By late afternoon, I'd signed a preliminary contract and walked out into the cold with a genuine smile tugging at my lips. I didn't go back to my friend's place. Instead, I found a furnished apartment in the city center and signed a short-term lease. It wasn't home yet, but it was mine. The space was modern, all clean lines and soft lighting, a blank canvas waiting to be shaped by someone free from old obligations. That night I unpacked only the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and a framed certificate from my first big case win. I set it on the desk by the window, the city lights glittering beyond. For the first time in months, I slept without waking in the middle of the night to an empty bed and a restless mind. 3 months had passed since I'd walked out of Cross Legal for the last time. In that time I'd settled into my new role at Hayes & Clark with surprising ease. Victor Hayes proved to be a man of his word. I had full authority over the litigation department, my pick of the best associates, and an open door to the firm's most influential clients. The work was demanding, but it was clean, free of the corrosive games I'd endured before. And then one morning, as I reviewed a case file over coffee in my corner office, the first ripple of news about Nathan's firm reached me. It came in the form of a push notification from a legal news app. Public outcry over Cross Legal's handling of Revenge for Mother trial. I clicked. The article detailed how Sophie Lane had taken on a sensational criminal defense case. A woman accused of killing to avenge her child, and handled it with the grace of a bulldozer in a glass shop. Her arguments had been cold, mechanical, tone-deaf to the public's moral outrage. Worse, her cross-examination of a grieving witness had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. A clip was circulating online. Sophie's voice, dripping with condescension, asking the bereaved, "Isn't it true you could have prevented all of this?" By the end of the trial, the defendant was convicted. The verdict itself might not have been Sophie's fault, but the optics were disastrous. Social media lit up with outrage. News anchors dissected her every word. Within 48 hours, #ColdCaseQueen was trending on 3 different platforms. Clients began withdrawing. First a trickle, 1 or 2 quiet terminations of contract. Then a wave. Corporate accounts Nathan had courted for years sent formal notices, citing public image concerns and reputational risk. The firm's official social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Google reviews plummeted. On a popular legal forum, an anonymous post from a former Cross Legal associate described the internal chaos, naming Sophie as the primary cause and hinting at favoritism from Nathan. I didn't need to guess whether the rumor mill was exaggerating. I'd lived there. The internal damage was even worse. Several senior lawyers, already disillusioned by Nathan's leadership, took the opportunity to jump ship. Without their billables, the firm's revenue nosedived. Morale was in free fall, the kind of atmosphere where whispered conversations stopped when Nathan walked into the room. By early spring, Cross Legal's performance had dropped enough to catch the attention of the city's legal press. A headline from Metro Legal Watch read, "Is Cross Legal circling the drain?" The call came on a rainy Thursday evening. My phone lit up with Nathan's name. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to answer. In the end, curiosity won. "Elena," he said the moment I picked up, his voice oddly formal. "We need to talk." "About?" "The firm," he said as if that were obvious. "You've seen the news. Sophie's. Well, she's not handling the backlash well. The public's perception is killing us. I want you to come back. We can let bygones be bygones. Start fresh." I almost laughed. "You want me to come back to clean up your mess?" "I'm offering you the chance to restore what you helped build," he said, slipping into that persuasive tone he used on hesitant clients. "We can renegotiate your position, your pay. You can have more authority. This is me extending an olive branch." An olive branch. As if he were the benevolent one here. "I'm not interested," I said. "Elena, don't be hasty," he pressed. "I've already spoken to everyone worth speaking to in this city. If you're holding out for another offer, it won't come. No one else will take you." I smiled to myself, leaning back in my chair. "Is that so?" "Yes. Unless you're willing to start over in another city entirely, you're better off coming back now." "Funny," I said lightly, "because I've already signed with someone else." Silence. Then wary, "Who?" "Victor Hayes," I said. "Hayes and Clark." The sharp intake of breath on the other end was almost satisfying. "You're lying." "No," I said, savoring the moment. "I'm not. In fact, I've been there for 3 months. Partnership. Full control of litigation. You should read the industry bulletins more closely." Nathan recovered quickly, or tried to. "If that's true, then Hayes made a mistake. You think he'll stand by you once he hears what I have to say?" "Go ahead," I said. "I'd love to hear what version you come up with." We ended the call there, but I wasn't surprised when Victor stopped by my office the next morning, a faintly amused look on his face. Had an interesting conversation last night, he said. Your ex-husband seems to think I should reconsider hiring you. Claimed there was a gentleman's agreement in the local circle to blacklist you. And? I asked. Victor's mouth curved. And I told him that if there was such an agreement, it was childish, petty, and unenforceable. Also that Hayes and Clark doesn't take career advice from failing firms. 2 days later I attended a legal association luncheon with Victor. Nathan was there working the room with forced charm. At one point, I noticed him corner Victor near the buffet table, gesturing with barely concealed agitation. I drifted close enough to hear Victor's voice, calm, carrying just enough to draw nearby attention. What kind of talk is that, Cross? Trying to cut off someone's livelihood because she left you? Do you think that's professional? The other partners have been giving you face because your numbers were decent the past couple of years, but now? You're embarrassing yourself. And frankly, the firm. Several heads turned. Nathan flushed, his jaw clenching. Victor didn't wait for a reply, he simply turned, spotted me and smiled. Ah, Bennett. He caught himself, then corrected. More. Glad you could make it. The incident made the rounds faster than Nathan could contain it. In a city where reputation was currency, being publicly dressed down by Victor Hayes was a blow that would bruise for a long time. By the end of that week, the whispers about Cross Legal had shifted. It wasn't just about Sophie's disaster case anymore. It was about Nathan's inability to lead without letting personal grudges interfere. For me, the days rolled on unaffected. My caseload at Hayes and Clark grew, my team settled in, and the firm's PR department quietly boosted my profile in industry publications. Nathan's calls stopped. So did his attempts to block me. I suspected it wasn't because he'd given up, but because he was running out of energy to fight battles he couldn't win. It was late afternoon when my phone rang, flashing a number I hadn't seen in months. For a second I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered with a cool, Elena Moore. There was no greeting. Only Sophie's voice, sharp enough to cut glass. So, she spat, you must be proud of yourself. I frowned, leaning back in my office chair. Excuse me. Don't play innocent. You've been gloating ever since I messed up that trial. I know you've been talking to your little industry friends, feeding them stories, making me look incompetent. I don't need to make you look incompetent, I said flatly. You've done that yourself. There was a beat of silence, then her voice rose. You think Nathan doesn't see what you're doing? You're trying to ruin us. You can't stand that he chose me over you. Before I could respond, another voice cut in, Nathan's. Sophie, give me the phone. No, she snapped. She needs to hear this. I heard the muffled sound of a scuffle for the phone, the rustle of fabric, then Nathan's voice, sharper now. Enough, Sophie. You're making a scene. A scene. Sophie's tone was incredulous. You promised me, Nathan. You said once Elena was out of the picture we'd build a life together. You said I'd be your partner, in the firm and in everything else. No. Now you barely look at me. Nathan's reply was cold. I said what I needed to say to get what I wanted. Even from my side of the line, I could hear the breath catch in Sophie's throat. You lied to me? Call it strategy, he said. You were useful at the time. That's all. The words landed like a physical blow. I could hear it in the way Sophie's voice faltered. Useful. The next sound was a door slamming. Then nothing but Nathan's breathing on the line. She's gone, he said finally. For good, I think. I'm sure you'll survive, I said dryly. Elena, his voice shifted, taking on that soft, coaxing tone I'd once been susceptible to. I've cut her off. Completely. There's no one else. It's just me now. We could try again. We could rebuild what we had. No, I said simply. You can't just. His tone cracked, the first hint of real emotion I'd heard from him in years. You can't just throw away everything we built. Don't you remember how it used to be? The late nights building the firm, celebrating our first big case win, the plans we made. I remember, I said quietly. I also remember you undermining me in front of associates. I remember you handing over cases I'd worked on for months to Sophie because she batted her eyelashes at you. I remember finding her stockings in your desk drawer. That was a mistake, he said quickly. One mistake. It was a choice, I cut in. Over and over again you chose her. And you don't get to choose me now just because she's gone and the firm's burning." There was a long silence on the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost broken. "So that's it? After everything?" "That's it," I said. "You wanted freedom from me, Nathan. Now you have it. Use it well." I hung up before he could reply. For a moment I just sat there, phone still in my hand, the quiet hum of my office around me. I felt nothing. No anger, no grief. Just a clean emptiness, like closing the final page of a book I'd long since stopped enjoying. I didn't hear from Sophie again. Word in the industry was that she'd left the firm entirely, citing irreconcilable differences with management, a polite phrase that barely concealed the truth. Nathan's firm continued its slow collapse, but I no longer cared enough to follow the details. Whatever happened to him from here on out, it was no longer my concern. The first sign that Cross Legal was running on fumes didn't come from the headlines or the forums. It came from the silence between the headlines. For weeks there were no glossy press photos of Nathan shaking hands with a new client, no sponsored posts about another landmark victory, no party shots of associates in glittering halls. The city has a way of going quiet before it pronounces a verdict. It was doing it now. From my office at Hayes and Clark, I watched the skyline bruise into evening while my team packed up after another solid day. I should have felt nothing about Nathan's slow decline, not schadenfreude, not pity, just the clean neutrality I cultivated for work. Mostly I succeeded, sometimes not. 3 months since the luncheon where Victor publicly cut him down to size. 2 since Nathan stopped calling me. 1 since a senior partner from Cross Legal, someone I'd mentored, quietly asked if we had openings and joined us a week later. By then the rumor was no longer rumor. Payroll had slipped. 1 retainer was frozen. 2 were gone. Then one Tuesday at 7:14 p.m., my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. "Ms. Moore," a male voice said. "Detective Rao, City Homicide. I'm calling regarding Nathan Cross." I said nothing for a beat, the evening air suddenly too still. "There's been an incident at Cross Legal," he continued. "A woman, Sophie Lane, was transported to St. Mark's. She didn't survive. Mr. Cross is in custody. He's asked that you represent him." A breath I didn't realize I'd been holding left me. What happened? Preliminary statements and scene evidence indicate an altercation. Witnesses describe shouting. There was a struggle in Mr. Cross's office. A pair of shears, heavy steel, were used. We're still collecting surveillance and lab results. I pressed a knuckle to the window as if the glass could anchor me. "I'll come down. You should know," he added, voice gentler. "There's a lot of history here from what I gather. Take your time." "I don't need time," I said and meant it. "I'll be there in 20. The precinct at night hums with a different energy. Lower voices, sharper edges. I signed in, was buzzed past the glass and found Nathan in interview 2. No tie, shirt sleeves rolled up, a smear I didn't want to identify dried brown near his cuff. His face had collapsed into years I'd never seen on him. The sharpness that once cut rooms open now cut inward. "Elena," he exhaled like a man surfacing. "Thank God. Saturday, I'm here as an attorney, not as your anything else." He nodded quickly as if agreement could rewind the last year. "They're saying," his voice cracked. He swallowed, tried again. "They're saying I murdered her. It wasn't like that." "Tell me what you remember," I said, pressing the recorder's red light. His hands trembled, then clenched. "The firm's been bleeding. Clients, partners. I told Sophie we couldn't float the marketing vanity projects anymore. She's been distant." "Distant," I repeated. "Tonight I got a tip from IT that someone was moving funds. 3 transfers, staggered, routed through a consulting LLC I didn't recognize." He rubbed his temples. I went back to the office. Sophie was there. Lights off. Door unlocked. She was at my desk, Elena. My desk. Moving money out of operating. I confronted her. She said something about a parachute, that she deserved it after everything I'd promised and didn't deliver. His eyes flicked toward the mirror, knowing detectives were behind it. Then back to me. I grabbed the phone to call security. She tried to yank it away. We struggled. She slapped me. I pushed her off. She reached for the scissors, you know, the heavy pair in the pen cup, and waved them. He swallowed hard. I grabbed them. To stop her. She lunged again. It was fast. He opened and closed his hand as if the weight were still there. I didn't mean. I let the silence stretch. Nathan, did you stab her? His mouth opened. Closed. Yes, he whispered. Once. Maybe twice. I don't know. There it was, the whole case packed into a single yes. Why did you ask for me? I said. He met my eyes with the past. Because you're the only one who won't lie to me about my chances. And because, once, you were the person who could pull me back from the worst version of myself. I didn't answer that. I'll do one thing for you, I said. I'll make sure the process is fair and the facts are presented cleanly. If there's a path to a lesser charge, I'll find it. But I won't manufacture one. Understood? He nodded, relief and fear in equal measure. Understood. The evidence arrived in a slow, relentless tide. First came the witness statements. 2 associates working late heard shouting, "You promised me, put that down, don't you dare." A paralegal saw Sophie hurry into Nathan's office. 10 minutes later she heard a crash and glass breaking. Then the scream. Next came the surveillance pulls. Lobby cams caught Sophie entering alone at 6:53 p.m., head down, a tote bag hugged tight to her side. Nathan arrived at 7:06 p.m., face set, stride hard. No cameras in the executive suite. Nathan had insisted on privacy when we planned the renovation. The irony wasn't lost on me, but a hall cam showed him closing his door, then 11 minutes later, opening it with his phone pressed to his ear, shouting for help. The forensics told their own blunt story. Blood spatter analysis mapped a constellation. Medium velocity spray consistent with a forceful thrust. Cast-off arcs on the far wall suggested at least 2 motions. The shears, weighted steel 8 inches, engraved with CL for cross-legal, carried Sophie's blood and Nathan's prints. The wound path indicated a downward angle through the upper left chest. A terrible, efficient line. Then came the digital forensics. IT logs of attempted transfers from operating to a new LLC, Lane Strategic Holdings, filed weeks earlier with Sophie's apartment address. Fraud, yes. But the law cares about sequence. What happened first, whether the deadly force was necessary or reasonable. If I could shape that sequence into chaos rather than cold intent, we might steer the charge away from murder toward heat of passion manslaughter, maybe even a form of excessive self-defense. It wasn't salvation. It was less ruin. I met Nathan in lockup with a yellow pad thick with notes. We'll waive preliminary theatrics and go straight to the essentials, I said. We concede you inflicted the injury. We contest intent. We frame this as a sudden volatile struggle triggered by financial betrayal. Hers, compounded by months of stress. You reached for the shears to disarm. The fatal thrust occurred in a flurry. The more we describe deliberation, the worse it gets. Will they believe me? He said. They'll believe what the evidence allows them to believe, I said. Help me by telling the truth cleanly. No embellishment. No self-exonerating monologues. He nodded. And one more thing, I added. If you contact me again with any plea for us, I'm off the case. Do you understand? A flinch, then, understood. Arraignment turned heads. The courtroom buzzed with schadenfreude dressed as civic interest. Reporters lined the back row, pens lifted like lances. Nathan stood in a navy suit borrowed through a friend. No handcuffs, but the gravity of the charge was its own chain. He pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder, jaw tight, eyes on the judge's dais like a drowning man watching a lifeguard's hands. I filed motions to exclude inflammatory character evidence and to admit the financial logs of Sophie's attempted transfers to establish provocation. The prosecution fought to keep the money out, a sideshow, they called it, but Judge Alvarez allowed a limited scope. The jury could hear about the transfers to contextualize the argument, not to justify violence. Trial opened on a Monday with the gentle smell of old varnish and a hush that felt like ritual. The prosecutor, Caleb Hart, meticulous, incisive, told the jury this was not about a bad breakup or a failing firm. It was about choices. The defendant chose to pick up a deadly instrument, he said, palm open to the shears sealed in an evidence bag. He chose to drive it into a woman's chest. My opening was narrower. You will not hear a defense that glorifies Mr. Cross, I began. You will hear a defense that recognizes messy human panic. This case lives in seconds. A frantic scuffle over a phone, a flash of metal meant to threaten but not to pierce, and a catastrophic thrust in the middle of chaos. No one gets to rewind seconds. We can only examine them. Witness after witness sketched the argument's soundscape. The paralegal wept describing Sophie's scream. The associate with the office nearest Nathan's lowered his eyes when he admitted he'd heard something heavy hit the floor. He hadn't gone in. A security guard described finding Sophie on the carpet, blood pooling, Nathan kneeling, hands sticky, repeating, "Call 911, call 911. Then the medical examiner. Clinical, careful. The blade entered above the third rib, angled down, nicked the lung, tore the pericardium. Survivable? I asked. With immediate surgical intervention, and if the trajectory had been a degree shallower, perhaps. As it occurred, unlikely. We stipulated the cause of death to spare gratuitous photos. The jury's faces told me I'd made the right choice. Disgust is not friendly to nuance. The state leaned hard on the blood patterns and on Nathan's strength. You're over 6 feet, correct? Caleb asked him on cross later. You routinely worked out. You keep a heavy bag at home. So when you say you pushed Ms. Lane off you, that push carried force. Nathan's hands tightened on the rail. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just wanted her to stop. Stop what? Caleb asked. Moving money? Or leaving you? The objection was instant. Sustained. When it was my turn, I asked the IT manager to walk the jury through the 3 transfers queued that evening. Amounts, timing, destination. I let the numbers tell the theft without adjectives. Then I called Nathan, not because I believed he could charm them, he couldn't, but because silence would look like arrogance. He spoke haltingly. I was angry. She'd been exploiting the firm. When I realized, I confronted her. She laughed. She said it was what I deserved. He swallowed. I reached for the phone. He grabbed for it. I saw the shears in her hand. It looked like she'd cut something earlier, and I panicked. I grabbed them. She lunged again. His voice thinned. Everything happened at once. Did you intend to kill her? I asked. No, he said, and for a second the courtroom believed him because he believed himself. Caleb's cross dismantled the moment. Mr. Cross, how many times did you thrust? I don't know. The cast-off pattern suggests at least 2. Did you stop after the first? I don't remember. And yet you remember her exact words, her laugh. Convenient. Objection. Sustained. The point had landed anyway. 2 curveballs hit in the final stretch. The first, a surprise witness, Sophie's husband. The ripple that passed through the room was audible. He testified to a short, impulsive marriage kept quiet for career reasons, to months of nights where she worked late, to a text from her at 6:45 p.m., meeting Nathan to settle accounts. The phrase sounded transactional and damning at once. The second, a janitor's body cam video. New policy at the building had custodial staff recording in executive areas after hours for security disputes. The camera didn't show the interior of Nathan's office, but it captured the hallway during the critical minute. Sophie's voice, furious high, "You lied to me," Nathan's, lower tight, "Put it down," a thud, the sharp sound of metal hitting wood, the scream, and then Nathan bursting into the corridor, blood on his wrist, shouting for help. The jury had the chaos I promised. They also had the blade, the angle, the strength. Closing arguments were a study in proportion. Caleb framed choices. I framed seconds. He asked for second-degree murder. I argued for manslaughter under sudden quarrel or heat of passion, alternatively excessive self-defense. They didn't take long. On count 1, the foreperson read, voice steady, "We find the defendant, Nathan Cross, guilty of voluntary manslaughter." A mutter swept the room. Some surprised at the reduction, others at the conviction at all. Nathan exhaled a shuddering breath that looked almost like gratitude. Less than murder, more than hope. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge's words were careful. This court recognizes the emotional volatility present, the financial provocation, and the defendant's lack of prior violent record. It also recognizes the sanctity of life and the duty to choose restraint. I sentence you to 14 years in state custody, with eligibility for parole after 9, credit for time served. Nathan closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked for me. Kept my gaze level. Outside, the press bloomed like a field of microphones. Victor's driver had already pulled to the curb, but before I stepped in, an officer hurried out. "Ms. Moore, he's asking if you'll speak to him. Just for a moment." I hesitated only long enough to know I wouldn't regret it. Inside, a deputy stood to the side while Nathan waited in the small post-hearing room, shackles clinking when he shifted. "Elena," he said, voice raw. "I don't know how to say anything that matters. I was awful to you. I became someone else. You were the last person who told me the truth. Thank you for that. I'm sorry for everything else." The apology wasn't a key to any door in me. It was a record finally set down where it belonged. "I did my job," I said. "I gave you fairness. That's all I owed you." He nodded, throat working. Was there ever a chance?" "No," I said, soft but sure. "From the moment you chose her and then chose to lie about it, there was no path back to us. And from the moment you chose the blade, there was no path back to who you were either." His eyes shone, but he didn't argue. The deputy touched his elbow. He stood, chains murmuring, and for the first time since I'd known him, Nathan Cross didn't try to control the room. He let himself be led. I stepped into afternoon light that smelled faintly of rain. The city thrummed around me, unconcerned, unbroken. In the car, Victor didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't need to. "Dinner at 8? He said instead, eyes on the road. "You've been carrying 3 trials at once. You deserve something with garlic and butter." I smiled. 8 works. We drove past the block where the firm Nathan built used to glow with late-night certainty. Its windows were dark now, a for lease sign taped in one corner of the lobby glass. For a single beat, memory tried to surface. First wins, first toasts, the thrill of building something from audacity. Then the image dissolved like breath on a mirror. At home, I watered the small forest of plants that had survived the past months under my new routines. I set my trial binder on the shelf beside the framed certificate from my first landmark case, aligned the spines and let the quiet settle. I didn't survive Nathan, I thought. I survived the version of myself who tolerated him. That woman had done her best with what she knew. This one knew better. Out on the balcony, the city gave its usual evening recital. Sirens far away, a neighbor's laughter, the tinny chime of a bicycle bell, a train sighing past river lights. I leaned on the rail, felt the metal cool against my palms and let the air move through me. Tomorrow there would be motions and clients and strategy, work that filled my days with purpose. Tonight there would be dinner with people who respected mine. And beyond that, there would be a life I chose because I had finally learned to choose myself. Behind me my phone buzzed and went still. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. The sky deepened, the city blinked, and somewhere a violinist on a stoop lifted a melody that wandered up 12 floors to find me. I stayed until the last note rerouted the air and faded, then turned inside, closed the door and let it latch. The end.